Good to see everybody out this morning. Glad we can have our Sunday school class. Glad we can get things started off like Charles leads us. So Charles, thank you. Mike, thank you. We appreciate you and all you do, and we certainly appreciate your mother and miss her. I'm not sure if you're taking the sartorial advice from Charles is exactly where you want to go, but I thought if those guys swapped clothes today, nobody would recognize either one of them.
I'll meet you across the hall in a minute.
You know, Charles also could be someone to give grammatical advice because he said it just exactly right. One of the larger questions of the state of Tennessee in this part of the country is whether it's Appalachian or Appalachian. And Charles said it exactly right, Appalachian. And if you don't agree with that, then you know that our wise and greatly involved state legislature passed a law last week that the correct pronunciation was Appalachian, just like Charles said. So Charles, we appreciate all the way you kind of bring us up today. I'm also sorry about what took place at Hiwassee. I have argued, and sometimes it's kind of been that, for almost 20 years, and about half of that as trustee at Wesleyan. I thought they needed to figure out some way out that Wesleyan could figure out how to embrace Hiwassee in spite of its financial issues. And it could become the Hiwassee campus of Tennessee Wesleyan University and serve a bunch of people that maybe could then find their way to higher education. So I don't know. I wish that would have had a different story. I grew up next door to a Hiwassee professor and his family. We lived in Madisonville for a little over a year and were at Hiwassee eating Sunday lunch every Sunday when they served it to the community. And that school has, just like John said, made a huge difference in the lives of so many people across the years. So certainly be in prayer about that situation.
What was the name of the person that taught at Hiwassee?
Laycock.
Yes, Evelyn Laycock.
Yep. Well, she was a dandy too. She was kind of like the Nell Mooney of that environment.
She was tremendous.
Yep. God bless you. The thought that I could remember that is totally refreshing to me. Any of y'all ever feel that way? We are, I'm going to say something, Nick, and I almost forgot it. It's going to make you feel better, maybe. I'm not sure. I was in South Bend this week, and then I went to Grand Rapids this week, running my mouth in the north. At the end of my presentation in Grand Rapids, a man walked up to me. Obviously, it was at that point clear I was from East Tennessee, and he introduced himself as a Big Ten basketball referee, which he is. And he looked the part. And he said, I never like to talk badly about my brother referees. In fact, we're not supposed to. He said, between you and me, that call at the end of the Tennessee and Purdue basketball game was an awful call. Amen. Anybody? All right, we'll go on. We'll wish Mike and Billy luck. It's too bad they can't both lose. No, I didn't say that. We'll wish Mike and Billy a good luck. All right, we're in the fourth Sunday of Lent. We have approached it like this. We've said that Lent usually becomes a time in which we think about giving something up. Reclaiming New Year's resolutions that we've kind of already failed on. We try to say that Lent in the history of the traditions of the Christian church is a time in which we do things to prepare ourselves for Easter. That's a much healthier way to look at Lent. And so we kind of put those two things together and said, what is it that we can give up that would better prepare us for the beauty and glory and the messages of Easter? And we've found our way through giving up certainty, which might make us a little more tolerant of other people and not think that we've, kind of cornered the market on the truth of God or anything else. We've talked about giving up on hate speech, although we decided that probably in the context of this class, we don't participate in much hate speech, so we talked about hateful speech. But we talked about how sometimes the world that we live in and the climates that we exist in can kind of work back and forth to make both of those become stronger than they need to. And last Sunday we talked about giving up sources of criticism that are in the backdrop of our lives that sometimes continue to hurt us and impinge upon our happiness in ways that they don't need to. So now you're asking yourself, what else do we have to give up on? Well, you guessed it, I've thought of something else we need to give up on. And I hope you'll kind of take this one with you a little bit. I went to my first UT football game when I was 11 years old. UT was playing LSU, which that year was the national champions. Are any of you all old enough to remember a coach named Paul Dietzel? Anybody old enough to remember a running back named Billy Cannon who won the Heisman Trophy? And if you were really up to date on things, you'd know what they call their defensive squad, the Chinese Bandits. God bless you, me and you. Our mind is still working. And on that day, because of the efforts of a young man from Athens named Jimmy Cartwright and another young man from Athens called Wayne Grubb, Tennessee beat LSU. That was one of those most glorious moments. It just still gives me chill bumps to think about that. And that was my first time out. And I kind of got in my mind it was supposed to be like that all of the time. I have seldom gone to a UT football game, much like I'm sure Graham has seldom looked at a North Carolina basketball game without thinking, this is our day, it doesn't matter who the opponent is. This is our day, we're going to come back very happily. We're going to all be going up in the rankings of life because of the way they play. I've not always come back in that way. I can remember several years ago that UT was playing Georgia Tech in Atlanta, and my brother-in-law was wanting to go, and so I got myself together with all my travel expertise and got us all tickets in the same hotel, got us good tickets for the ball game, got us a reservation at a nice restaurant. So I was kind of the host of this event, and wanting to be the host with the most, you know, I just tried to take care of everything. We got to the hotel, and when I stood in line at the hotel to get our rooms, I was informed that our rooms had already been given away, that we didn't have a legitimate reservation. Of course, I had a legitimate reservation in my pocket. I'd been down that road before. And so immediately I asked to talk to the manager. The guy at the desk said, we'd like you to step back over here and we'll take care of you. And I said, I'm not moving. I said, we got to take care of this before we get to this line of 20 people that's growing behind me. Well, I didn't move. I said a couple of things that I've had to ask God for forgiveness about, but we'll save that for another day. But the manager came out, and to make a long story short, we ended up in a two-room suite that was comped because they should have taken care of us better. So I'm really looking good. I'm really now prepared to go to that ball game. My brother-in-law and Philip, my son, are kind of worried about what the outcome might be. And I remember boisterously saying, I wish George Ganaway was here. This was planned for George Ganaway. I said, look, guys, we're playing the North Avenue Trade School. I said, we don't have anything to worry about. And of course, we went out, and the game was closer than it should have been, and it was nerve-wracking as it could possibly be. And Georgia Tech beat Tennessee. So I rode back to Chattanooga in kind of a bad mood. Phyllis kept reminding me kids were around and try something. My bad mood just didn't seem to improve. Now, if you go to the University of Chicago today, now that's a little bit of a segue, isn't it? You'll find that in their philosophy department and in their psychology department that they are sounding the theme about a new kind of topic that they're doing research on, and that we'll probably hear more and more about because it's becoming very prominent across this country. They're talking about something called cruel optimism. Cruel optimism. And they're talking about how in the kind of world that we've come to live in with benefits like no one else has ever had, the kind of country that we've come to live in that has made the American dream just seem just platinum, gold, and diamond. In the kind of world that most of us have been brought up in, sometimes we can become very, very optimistic about outcomes, just like I was at the Georgia Tech football game. We can become very, very optimistic about what life might be able to come to, and sometimes it doesn't turn out like that. And cruel optimism is defined as when we become so optimistic about something, so unrealistically optimistic about something, that when life lets us down and things don't go that way, it depresses us, it keeps us from flourishing, it keeps us from being able to go forward in our lives as much as we might possibly could be. And so I'm thinking about, for this Lent, trying my very best to give up, not on optimism. I'm not interested in being a non-optimistic person, but maybe understanding that there are dimensions of optimism that it might be helpful to give up on. I'm interested in thinking about how I might give up on cruel optimism, so that when something happens, like your ball team not winning, that you get down on life for a couple of days, or maybe longer than that. When you don't win the lottery, although you pray to God about that and seem pretty secure, that you don't get down on life about that. And so I believe that, in fact, that cruel optimism is a concept that every one of us could understand really well. I can tell you when that hit me in the face worse than any other time in my existence. My mother had been diagnosed with cancer when I was 8. She struggled with that for 4 years. By the time I was 12 and just about to turn 13 in the middle of the year, she'd been in and out of the hospital since Christmas, and you could tell from the body language of my father and my older brothers and from my aunts that there was something going on here that was really, really pretty bad. And my little brother, who was almost 3 years younger than me, he looked up to me. I hope he still does. And we were very, very close. And so anytime he had a problem or something that he was worried about, he would come to me and ask me, what was going on and how this needed to be responded to. And I never will forget him coming to me. And he didn't cry much, kind of with tears in his eyes and cry in his voice. And he said, of blood because of the situation he was in, but he did. And he asked them a very simple thing. He asked them to pray for him while he was there. And Jesus goes in there and prays, and the moment must have had some degree of trauma. And he heads back out. He knows his friends are going to be out there, these people that are really there to support him and help him. And what does he find? He goes out there and he finds that they're all asleep. And he kind of wanders away, asking them, couldn't you just stay awake and pray for me? And I think that Jesus experienced cruel optimism. It's interesting as we think toward Easter and we think toward the resurrection, that we see on that day that Jesus rises that there are no disciples around anywhere. There's not one single one of those disciples that shows up at that garden tomb remembering what Jesus said about the third day. Not one of them. Some of them went back to what old Harold Bales used to call their smelly boats and their empty nets. And they did. Not one of those men showed up. And I'll bet you that while they were out there fishing or hiding or whatever they were doing, that they were experiencing a load of cruel optimism. It's interesting to me. It's women that show up. And although they hated what had happened as much as the men, in their lives there was a place that was still reserved for hope. and they are the ones that show up. And you know, across my life, I've kind of experienced that. I don't know about you. It's like men sometimes are the ones that can get the most optimistic, and then when it doesn't turn out, the cruel optimism just reigns all over their lives. And maybe by raising kids or all the glass ceilings they've had to break or things that they've had to experience in life, maybe women are better at avoiding the travails of cruel optimism. I'm not sure about that. It'll give you something at least to think about this afternoon. This next point's not intended to be funny. It's intended to be serious. You know what's cured me a little bit from cruel optimism? And I'm telling you, it's taken decades. I'm standing up here with somebody that's flown right at 2 million miles on Delta. I got another 500,000 miles on Southwest. And I got another almost 200 on odd airplanes when I couldn't get a Delta or Southwest reservation. So I know about airplanes, and I know about airports, and I know about what takes place in those transactions. For many, many years, I would go to airports and airplanes with great optimism that the flights were going to run and they were going to get there on time and that there's not going to be any problems with weathers and pilots and crews and machines. And oh, I can't tell you how many times those hopes were dashed against the stones of reality. And oh, I think I'd upset God sometimes and he was showing me, or I think that I was a fool for doing what I was doing, or I would think that the world was just totally filled with incompetence, and I would get so upset and I would hate to call and apologize, and I'd try to do everything that I could to still get there. I've driven overnight places just to get there so I wouldn't be late, cursing airlines all of the way. But you know, somewhere along the way, I quit doing that. Maybe I finally figured out it didn't help or work. I quit doing that. And so I still go with the optimism it'll turn out right. But I still go now prepared, if it doesn't, to just deal with that situation and go on. And so about a month and a half ago, and I know Charles has experienced this more than I have, I've got a really important meeting in Lafayette, Louisiana. And then I've got to get back from Lafayette to Atlanta to South Bend, Indiana for another really important meeting. And it's all set up. Weather's not real good, but looks like I'm out ahead of it. And we're in the landing for Lafayette. The wheels are already down. We are less than 5 minutes from being on the ground, and now life's going to work. And you know what happened? That old airplane just decided to go up instead of down. And in a moment, the pilot is saying the storm has hit the field at Lafayette. We've been diverted to Baton Rouge. And I know that there are places that you'd like to spend 9 hours of your life, but I can promise you that the airport in Baton Rouge, Louisiana is one of those. Especially when every other 5 minutes the alarm is sounding and someone's coming on a loudspeaker saying, folks, please don't decide to get a rental car. Nobody needs to be out on the highways. The flooding that's out there is terrible. So I sat in the airport for 9 hours in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And I didn't get to Lafayette. And I didn't get to South Bend. And in that 9 hours, wrote 3 chapters of a book I'm writing on, because I didn't let myself go to cruel optimism. I was prepared with an alternative for cruel optimism. And what I accomplished in those 9 hours, I was almost ready to say, thank you, Delta. Thank you, God. I don't know when I would have ever gotten 9 hours to work on anything. Did you see the point I'm trying to make? I've tried in every way I know how to be done with cruel optimism. And to allow myself to get so set up for happy trails to me that when that doesn't happen, that suddenly I'm going nosediving off the edge of some kind of depression, despondent, anger, and mad cliff that does me no good or anyone else. I think just throwing out that idea, which I bet you've not heard before because I hadn't until several weeks ago, just throwing out the idea of cruel optimism could give you something to give up for Lent that would prepare you better for the glories of God that surround our lives in spite of the things of life that don't turn out like we would like or hope that they might. There's this old singer named John Prine, and some of you know John Prine, I hope. If you don't, you might ought to. John Prine's got this song, and it's country as it can be, but sometimes there's poetry in that. And John Prine talks about this man that shows up at a bar. That happens a lot in country music. And he runs into this beautiful woman. That happens a lot in country music. And to make a long story short, every ideal of his life is fulfilled for a weekend with this woman he's run into at the bar. That happens in country music sometimes. And as they begin to part company on Monday morning, he can't help himself. And so he says, "This was a wonderful weekend. Was it as good for you as it was for me?" And this is the refrain of the song that shows up in a number of other situations that, as a balladeer, he talks about. The woman responds in this way: "Pretty good. Not bad. Can't complain." But actually, after all, it's all about the same. I don't want to go to that. Do you? I don't want to go to that. I don't want to go to pretty good, not bad, can't complain. After all, it's all about the same. I don't want to go to that. But I don't want to go to cruel optimism either. Because that can break our spirits. And that can hurt our feelings. And that can make us feel like that we've done something wrong. Maybe sometimes we just need to sit down in the airport for 9 hours and watch it rain outside and know you're never going to get to where you thought you were going to go. And find 9 hours that can become wonderful in what you're able to do with them if you don't allow yourself to be ravaged by cruel optimism. That'd be something good to give up. Let us pray. Help us, O God, that we might always be people inspired by hope. Help us that we might always be people who have a deep and abiding longing for life to be as good as it can possibly be and for life to turn out well. And help us that we might always be thankful for when that happens. Help us that we might be optimists about the people that we love and the world that we're a part of. And even believe that our optimism and positive attitude can have an impact on people in the world. But help us to be careful with cruel optimism. It can happen to your son. It can happen to any of us. And it can really hurt and linger. So as we think about what we might be able to abridge and diminish and deconstruct in our lives, help us that we might somehow be able to move away from cruel optimism so that we might flourish and we might grow and we might continue to be better people in spite of the variables and realities that certainly inhabit our world. ask our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you all